And does anyone know in this room what redlining is or what it did to neighborhoods? Does anybody want to see somebody in the back, maybe? Yeah, okay, you know, all right, okay. So this is something that, again, HOLC started doing in the 30s that basically said if there was one black family within the neighborhood was gonna go on a decline. And that means you should move out, you should take all of the resources, don't invest into those communities because it's not worth it. Why would you? It's becoming browner, it's becoming blacker, it's not worth it to actually invest in these communities. And you still sort of see the remnants of this all throughout Cleveland, all throughout major cities that are majority black and brown. You don't want to drive that way because you never know what might happen. Stigma is probably one of those biggest things that is keeping some of these neighborhoods from being invested in and thriving. Addressing safety, designing public space. Public spaces that are activated are going to make a neighborhood feel safer. When neighborhoods have amenities, they're going to be proud and happy that people actually care. We can't have these spaces that are for the rich and for the poor and for middle class. That can't happen. We need to have the intermingling of different socioeconomic groups for there to be equality. And it's better for everyone, right? My name is Madison. I'm an architect. I've been working in the architecture space for about 10 years now, which is crazy. My great uncle started Robert P. Madison in 1954, and we're coming up on our 70th anniversary this year, which is crazy and amazing. He was the first black architect in Ohio, and it was the first black architecture firm in Ohio. And we're still thriving, which is unreal, and honestly, it's crazy to me. So, come from parents that are architects. My brother is in construction management, so this stuff just runs through our blood. It's what we do, it's who we are. My grandfather was an architect, my great uncle was an engineer, and my great-great-grandfather was an engineer. So this is just in me. I couldn't escape. I wanted to, but I couldn't do it. So we're gonna talk. I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about today, and a lot of things come to mind, right? But I really wanted to talk about my passion, and my passion really is about building community. It's one of the main reasons I went into architecture instead of fashion design, because I still hold true that architecture is the one art form that actually affects humans' lives. And everybody experiences it. Not everybody gets to experience the high fashion, right? But architecture is very personal, and it really does relate to humans and the way we navigate space and navigate our lives, ultimately. So I wanted to call this How Architects, Developers, and Urban Planners Can and Should Shape Community. And I think Great Big Talk is the perfect venue to talk about this because it's all about building community, right? So went the wrong way. So I really wanted to look at what the definition of an architect is. Any architect that you know will say we know a little bit about everything. We're experts in society, in sociology, all of these things. Engineering, we know about material, we know about the earth, we know about climate change, we know about how humans interact with each other and how they exist in buildings. So I really wanted to look at some of these definitions, and Google AI says, an architect plans, designs, and oversees the construction of buildings and the spaces around them, which I thought was pretty good. That sounds about right. The overseas part is a little off for me. But, and then Forbes said, architects are professionals trained in the art and science of building design. Everything architects design must be functional, safe, and meet the needs of the people who utilize them, which I thought was a pretty good one. Another organization called NCARB, which is the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. I looked at their website to see what they say. I'm actually on one of the committees on that board, and they're basically the board that defines everything that you need to do to become an architect. So they define the schooling, how many years you need to actually practice, and then also they actually write the exams to become a licensed architect. So I'm on one of those boards, and oftentimes we have a lot of conversations about what it means to be an architect, how you need to be, how competent you need to be to become an architect. So NCARB says the practice of architecture is the art and science of building in whole or in part the exterior and interior buildings and the site around them in a manner that protects the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And that health, safety, and welfare of the public is the biggest part, right? That's our most important thing that we have to do as architects. And it's something that, sort of gets overlooked sometimes. You don't really think about us protecting the public, right, as people that design buildings, but it's the most important thing that we do, ultimately. Keep going the wrong way, y'all, sorry. So there's certain things that go in under these things, right? So we look at fire safety, we look at code compliance, public safety, structural stability, the protection from the loss of life and property. And then under welfare, we say accessibility and universal design, so the American with Disabilities Act, indoor air quality, sense of safety and security, and access to sunlight, because that obviously has to do with well-being and all of that. But within these talks that we have within the committees at NCARB, we also have just been trying to figure out what are we missing under these boxes. And one thing that came to mind, especially right after 2020, we were thinking, well, seeing a pandemic happen and then seeing the uprising of race and all these aggressions across the country, we thought it's probably super important for us to start thinking about spaces that discriminate, spaces that facilitate racism, and spaces that literally just exclude humans, right? That's been going on forever in this country, and unfortunately, it's still a thing. So we were really trying to figure out, well, as designers, how can we make sure that we're trying to be better moving forward? So I want to get into a little bit of history of Cleveland's neighborhoods. And obviously, hopefully most of you in this room know what redlining is, but Cleveland, naturally, like every other major city, was redlined in 1939 by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And does anyone know in this room what redlining is or what it did to neighborhoods? Does anybody want to see somebody in the back, maybe? Yeah, okay, all right, okay. Just want to make sure. But I'll give what Wikipedia says: the discriminatory practice in which financial services are withheld from neighborhoods that have significant numbers of racial and ethnic minorities. So this is something that, again, HOLC started doing in the 30s, that basically said if there was one black family within the neighborhood was going to go on a decline. And that means you should move out, you should take all of the resources, don't invest into those communities because it's not worth it. Why would you? It's becoming browner, it's becoming blacker, it's not worth it to actually invest in these communities. And you still sort of see the remnants of this all throughout Cleveland, all throughout major cities that are majority black and brown. And that's essentially what led to a lot of the racial homogeneity and socioeconomic class within our neighborhoods. And that's why you see different pockets of different class within cities, basically all around the entire nation. So other things that have happened within black and brown communities that historically have totally ruined them are restrictive covenants, redlining, of course, as I said, urban renewal. Urban renewal is essentially when the city says, like, oh, well, we need to build a highway. Oftentimes it was built within lower class black and brown communities. Race riots, there were the race riots of Huff, which is right to the north of us, and that happened in major cities across the United States. The biggest one probably that everyone's heard of is Tulsa, which basically ruined the entire Black Wall Street. Also white flight, which naturally happened after redlining, and gentrification, which obviously is happening a lot more recently, but not so much in the Black neighborhoods of Cleveland right now, but I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. So obviously, discriminatory practices lead to all of these things. So like I said, the homogeneity of neighborhoods, neighborhood disinvestment, poorly funded public amenities, food deserts where people can't get fresh food, poor education, poor health, dilapidated structures, crime, and stigma. And stigma is a big one because oftentimes poor neighborhoods are associated with Black and brown, poor people, crime, it's scary, you don't want to drive that way because you never know what might happen. Stigma is probably one of those biggest things that is keeping some of these neighborhoods from being invested in and thriving. And it's something that where the culture really sort of needs to shift and think like, oh, but there's actual systemic things that have happened that has led to this, has led to the disinvestment and the neighborhoods to be like this. So how can architects, developers, and urban planners help foster change in marginalized communities and neighborhoods of color? Like I said, there's so many things that architects do, but oftentimes it feels like it's beyond us. Like, how can we help a community that's basically falling apart because it hasn't been invested in by the powers that be, right? So, but there's a bunch of different principles that have been studied on this, and basically what I'm gonna share with you isn't new stuff in my world. A lot of different groups have been doing the research on this and to figure out what's the best way to actually remedy what has been done and to basically give reparations to these neighborhoods. So addressing safety, designing public space. Public spaces that are activated are going to make a neighborhood feel safer. When neighborhoods have amenities, they're gonna be proud and happy that people actually care. So that's an important thing. That's a big one. Engage local residents. Don't just come in and say, oh, we're gonna build this Starbucks and this, you know what I mean? All of these things that essentially gentrify a neighborhood. Design spaces that gather, socialize, and access cultural resources. Prioritize the design of public space. And obviously designing nice lighting so that you feel safe at night. These are things that basically a study in New York City was done to figure out how to make spaces feel safer in certain neighborhoods. And the actual report is called Safe Places, Active Spaces. Other things that they discuss is break down unintentional boundaries. So a boundary that I think of right now is within Fairfax, there is the huge Cleveland Clinic campus that actually I'm working on a job there. But there's a huge boundary and there's a disconnect between the neighborhood and the huge, glamorous, rich campus. And the Cleveland Clinic doesn't pay taxes. So there's a lot that they could be doing, and they are doing the work to try to put in, well, they just put in a nice grocery store. They could be doing more, and I know that they're doing more, so behind the scenes that I'm not really aware of. But that right there is an example of a huge boundary between the haves and the have-nots. Diversify and expand activity in public spaces. So make sure that there's different things to do. So and outdoor seating for performances to happen, for speakers to come, for a great talk to happen, right? Different places for vendors to set up food or food trucks. This is all important to address the safety of a neighborhood. Provide equitable investment into the neighborhoods. I already went into why certain neighborhoods aren't invested in, so make sure that that they get the money that they need and they deserve. Encourage local commerce. Invest in beautifying the public places and spaces. So nice seating for benches, nice lighting, as I mentioned, good vegetation to keep the neighborhoods in the area cooler. When there's a lot of concrete, it usually makes a space not only feel unwelcoming, but also hotter for climate change purposes. And before designing, this is another group called Black Space, and they talk about what you need to do before actually going in and designing for a neighborhood, and that includes a lot of community engagement, so speaking with the actual residents, because ultimately they're the experts of their neighborhood. We might be experts in design, but they know about their neighborhood and what's gonna work. Move at the speed of trust. I think that's a big one. A lot of times these residents don't trust local governments and don't trust architects and designers because of all the harm that's been done throughout the years. So that's super important to make sure that we're listening and that we're understanding where they're coming from. And then these are just a few that I came up with just to summarize all of my research and then the research of other people that have been doing this hard work. So the redevelopment of neighborhoods must celebrate and represent the history and culture of current residences while providing amenities that will attract newcomers. And that's really just all about mitigating against gentrification. So making sure that when you are building new things within these neighborhoods, making sure that they represent the culture and the people that live there still. So that can be in the form of murals, that could be in the form of public art, that could even be within the architecture itself. I know that there's a particular home type called the shotgun home, which is very native to New Orleans, but that type of house is traced back to Africa and even into the Caribbean, and then you even come to New Orleans, and it's a similar type of style. So there's ways that we can harken back to our heritage and our culture within architecture itself. Neighborhoods should have a variety of housing densities and intertwine low-income, affordable, and market-rate residences free of hierarchical boundaries. That's a big one. Like, we can't have these spaces that are for the rich and for the poor and for middle class. Like, that can't happen. We need to have the intermingling of different socioeconomic groups for there to be equality. And it's better for everyone, right? Because we all, again, we were talking about community. We don't want the same people to be talking to each other, because then everybody starts to get in their little bubbles. We've seen it we've seen it all the time, especially with politics, you know what I mean? So it's important for us to all sort of come together and see each other and see, like, oh no, this person is human. This person's just like me. They want fresh food too, etc. So that's another one. Neighborhoods should allow for walkability and encourage bike transportation. And this one's all about health, right? Like, obviously, we want to get in our car and drive around, but it's nice, you got to get out, get some fresh air, work your body. And then this also lowers carbon emissions if you're walking around from place to place. If you can walk to your grocery store, like, that would be amazing. Also, to continue, communities need thoughtfully designed public space where people of all backgrounds can gather for a variety of activities and programs. So again, that's just going back to the diversity of making sure that you're providing spaces that can cater to multiple different demographics. Neighborhoods should incorporate the latest sustainability design strategies and technologies. So as we all know, Black and brown neighborhoods are affected the most by climate change. So we need to start putting in PV photovoltaic panels, EV charging stations for your cars. All of this needs to be incorporated into these neighborhoods just as much as they're being incorporated into the richer, higher class white neighborhoods. And neighborhoods should provide opportunities for employment and entrepreneurship and foster wealth and self-sustainability amongst residents in the greater community. And that one's just about making sure that some of the businesses that go into these communities aren't just these huge corporations. Like, let's have your mom and pop coffee shop that's Black owned right down the street. Have the hair salons, have the nail salons, you know what I mean? Let's make it so that it's a neighborhood that's for us and by us. Like, let's live by FUBU and really try to foster that within the community. And yeah, that's really it. So hope you guys like my talk. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.